The wind came in from the west, cold and sharp as a knife's edge, whispering across the brittle grasslands and the wide, sun-scoured plains. Out here in the Wyoming territory, where the land could turn on a man as quick as a lie, a woman could vanish without anyone noticing. Some preferred it that way. Her name was Maybelle, least that's what folks called her. She answered to it without flinching, but it wasn't the name she'd been born with. That one she'd buried like a keepsake in a place no one could reach. It was easier being nobody. Easier still in a town like Avonridge, where people had their own troubles and didn't much care to ask questions. She worked at the Dry Creek boarding house, the one with warped shutters and a sagging porch, owned by a widow named Mrs. Templeton who had a sharp tongue but kind eyes. May handled the linens and cooked the morning biscuits. She knew how to keep quiet, how to disappear into the hum of daily work. Every morning she swept the same pinewood floors, watched the same dust motes drift in the same honey-colored light. It was a life measured in simple tasks and silence. That suited her. Her face was plain in the way that made people overlook it. Soft, yes, but unremarkable. Ash-brown hair always tied back, eyes the muted green of river moss, lips drawn tight with a habitual caution. She kept her sleeves long, even in summer, and her posture low, her voice lower still. Men passed her by without a second look. She was used to it, grateful even. Until the stranger arrived. He came in just past dusk, riding a black gelding with a bad temperament and a scar down its haunch. He wore his coat buttoned high and a Stetson pulled low, the brim shadowing a face lined by years on the trail. The horse kicked up a fuss as he dismounted, and the man calmed it with a few murmured words, his hand steady against the animal's flank. There was something practiced in the gesture, something that spoke of patience and storms weathered. Mrs. Templeton greeted him with her usual briskness. He gave his name, Ashwork, and handed over $2 for 3 nights. Said he was passing through, didn't say where to. His voice was low, thick with the gravel of someone who'd been quiet too long and wasn't used to talking anymore. May stood behind the counter, half shielded by a cabinet of crockery, pretending to inventory teacups. He looked at her. Not with hunger, not with suspicion, just looked. Like she wasn't part of the furniture, like he saw something worth seeing. May dropped her eyes to the ledger. Her hand trembled. The next morning she found him sitting alone at the table closest to the window, nursing a tin cup of coffee and reading from a worn book of poetry. Not the kind of reading most drifters carried. She couldn't help glancing at the title, Emily Dickinson. The man had calloused hands, a gun belt, and an eye for verses about death and bees. He didn't talk much, didn't flirt, didn't boast. But when she came to clear his plate, he thanked her in a voice that sounded like it meant it. Looked at her again, soft and slow, like he was waiting for her to speak but not expecting her to. Just offering the quiet in case she wanted to step into it. That night she couldn't sleep. For the first time in a long while, her past crept out from under the floorboards. The screams she hadn't let herself remember. The man with the broken tooth and the red knuckles. The fire. The way she'd run for 3 days until her feet bled and the sky broke open with rain. She curled on her side, knees to chest, and pressed a hand to the ache that still lived just beneath her ribs. Ash stayed 3 days, then he stayed another 3. He started helping with the chores, fixed the porch railing without being asked, helped a boy whose wagon axle broke in the mud, didn't talk about himself. But he watched May like he was piecing together a story from the way she held her breath in crowds or stepped sideways when someone raised their voice. One evening, as the sun stretched long across the prairie, May found herself walking out past the edge of town, where the grass grew wild and golden. She needed air, space, something bigger than the room she'd been hiding in. She didn't hear his footsteps, but she felt him, solid and quiet at her shoulder. "I won't follow if you want to be alone," he said. She didn't answer at first, just looked out at the horizon where the sky burned orange and violet. "Most folks don't see me," she said finally, her voice cracked from disuse. "Not really." Ash looked at her, not startled, not demanding more, just waiting. "That's safer," she added. "If they don't see you, they can't hurt you." "Or help," he said. She turned her head slowly, searching his face. "You look like a man who's lost something." "I have," he said. They stood there a long time, the wind tugging at their sleeves, the prairie stretching out like an open wound. Neither of them moved. Not yet. A week passed, then two. Ash didn't speak of leaving again, and no one asked why he stayed. In towns like Avonridge, questions were currency, spent only when needed. The boarding house settled into a rhythm with him there, quiet, steady, useful. May began to expect the sound of his boots on the stairs in the morning, the way he nodded to her before he took his coffee. She still didn't speak much, but her silence softened around him, no longer a wall but a kind of listening. She caught herself watching him sometimes, from the kitchen window or behind the laundry line, noticing the way he cleaned his own dishes, fed the stray dog that lingered near the stable, mended his shirts by lantern light without complaint. He was a man made of solitude, but not pride. There was something broken in him, yes, but not jagged, worn smooth like driftwood. May didn't know what to make of that. Then came the girl. She arrived in the middle of the night, half frozen and wild-eyed, her skirts torn, her lips split. Pounded on the boarding house door like the devil himself was at her heels. Mrs. Templeton opened it in her nightgown, shotgun in hand. The girl collapsed in May's arms. She didn't say much at first, just that her name was Lottie and she'd come from a mining camp 2 counties west. Something bad had happened, something she couldn't bring herself to name. May recognized the signs. The trembling hands, the flinches, the silence thick with shame. She helped Lottie to the guest room and sat with her through the night, brushing sweat-matted hair from her brow, whispering words she didn't remember learning. Ash stood guard outside the door until morning. In the days that followed, Lottie barely spoke, but she clung to May like a child might to a mother, and May found herself stepping into that shape, unsure but steady. She made tea with chamomile, rubbed balm into the girl's bruised ribs, sat beside her through the worst of the nightmares. In Lottie's brokenness, May saw a mirror different but familiar. The way pain could make you vanish from your own skin, the way kindness could pull you back. Ash didn't ask questions. He built a cot for himself in the barn and let the girl have his room. When May thanked him, he just nodded, like it was nothing. But something passed between them in that glance, something quiet and unspoken, the understanding that both of them were learning how to care again, piece by piece. Weeks passed. The snow came early that year, clinging to the eaves like frostbitten lace. The boarding house became a refuge, not just for travelers but for the broken. Lottie began to laugh again, soft, uncertain, and Ash made her a wooden comb with her initials carved into it. May caught herself smiling more often, not for others, but because she felt something lift in her chest, something that had lain heavy for too long. Then one afternoon, while the light fell in long amber strokes across the parlor floor, Ash asked her if she'd walk with him. They didn't go far, just past the creek where the trees stood close and bare, their branches like bony fingers tracing the wind. The world was quiet there, safe. "You don't flinch like you used to," he said, voice low. She didn't answer right away. Her hands were tucked into the folds of her skirt, her breath showing pale against the air. "I still flinch," she said. "Just learn to do it where no one can see." He nodded like he understood that too well. "I used to think disappearing was the only way to stay alive," she added, "but now I'm not sure anymore." Ash crouched by the creek bank, picked up a stone, turned it over in his hand. "I disappeared once," he said, "after the war, after my brother died, thought if no one could find me, no one else could go." May watched him carefully. It was the first thing he'd said about his past. "What changed?" she asked. His eyes lifted to hers. "You." She felt the words like a door opening inside her, one she hadn't dared approach until now. He stood and held the stone out to her. She took it without thinking, smooth and cold and solid in her palm. "We're not ghosts," he said, "not if we're seen." She nodded, lips parted but unable to speak. And he didn't push her to. They walked back in silence, side by side, as the first snow began to fall in earnest, soft as ash from a long-dead fire. By the time December settled its full weight upon Avonridge, the world had gone still and white. Snow blanketed the rooftops and softened the sounds of daily life, muting wagon wheels and boot heels alike. The prairie looked endless beneath it, an ocean of silence. Inside the boarding house, the hearth was kept burning from dawn to dusk, and the rooms filled with the scent of cedar and flower and old quilts warmed by hand. Lottie had taken to helping in the kitchen, her laughter coming easier now, though her eyes still flickered toward doorways too often. Mrs. Templeton said it felt like the house had grown larger somehow, as if kindness could stretch its beams and thicken its walls. May moved through it all with a steadiness that surprised even her. Her hands remembered the work, but her heart felt newly awake. She found herself humming when she kneaded dough. She no longer avoided her own reflection. When she passed Ash on the stairs, she sometimes brushed his shoulder on purpose. He always paused, as if to hold that brief contact in his chest a little longer. But it was never more than that. They spoke rarely of feelings. What lived between them was quieter than confession, built in small moments. A mended hem, a fresh cup of coffee left just the way he liked it, a book of poems slipped into his coat pocket when he thought she wasn't looking. He returned it with a single line marked in pencil, "I'm nobody. Who are you?" Then came the telegram. It arrived on a morning washed in pale blue light. The boy from the station brought it wrapped in oilskin, his cheeks red from wind. Ash took it without a word, read it once, folded it into his coat. Something shifted in him. He didn't disappear, not exactly, but the light in his eyes went distant. He still worked the stables, still sat for meals, but the space between him and May widened, subtle as a crack in ice. When she asked about the telegram, he only said, "Old trouble," and looked past her. May knew better than to press, but the silence that followed gnawed at her. She had let herself believe in the warmth they'd found, the unspoken understanding. Now she wondered if she'd imagined it. One evening, unable to bear the weight of waiting, she followed him to the barn after supper. He was brushing down the gelding, slow strokes, lost in thought. He didn't look up when she entered. "Are you leaving?" she asked, voice careful. He paused, set the brush down, turned to her. "There's someone I need to find," he said. "Someone who went missing years ago. That telegram, it might be a lead." She nodded, though it felt like her ribs were caving in. "I didn't think I'd stay this long," he added. "Didn't plan on any of this." May stepped closer, fingers twisting in her skirts. The air between them hummed with everything unsaid. "I understand," she said, but her voice trembled. "It's just hard to be seen and then unseen again." Ash's jaw tightened. He looked down, then up, his eyes fierce with something that might have been sorrow. "I see you," he said, voice rough. "I never stopped." She wanted to believe him, but belief was a brittle thing, and hope had betrayed her before. "You're not the only one with someone to outrun," she whispered. He moved then, slow, as if afraid she might vanish, stopped just short of touching her. "I'll come back," he said, "if you want me to." May closed her eyes. The cold bit through her sleeves, her breath clouded in the space between them. "I don't want you to leave," she said finally, "but I won't ask you to stay." Ash reached out and touched her hand, just once, gently, as if marking the moment. And then he was gone. He left the next morning before the sun rose, left behind his books, his combs, the half-fixed saddle he'd been working on, left a note folded in her apron, "You helped me remember who I was. That matters more than you know." May read it once, then tucked it in the hollow behind a beam in the attic, somewhere safe, somewhere she could return to if the days grew dark again. The house grew quieter without him. Lottie noticed, though she didn't ask. Winter deepened. The wind howled down from the mountains. Still, May kept the hearth burning. She sang under her breath. She lived. Because something in her had changed. She was no longer hiding. Not even from herself. Spring came late that year, slow and cautious, as if the earth needed time to believe in warmth again. The snow melted in patches, revealing sodden grass and last year's bones. Birds returned in quiet flocks, testing the wind. The river swelled, ran fast and brown with memory. May woke each morning to the scent of thawing soil and the sound of Lottie sweeping the front walk. There was life here now, stitched into the boards of the boarding house, into the seams of daily routine. She had planted wildflowers in the window boxes. She had painted the parlor walls a soft pale green, the color of new beginnings. Still, when the wind came in from the west, her breath caught. She found herself listening for hooves, watching the horizon, not expecting but remembering. Ash had been gone 4 months. She tried not to mark the days, but they tallied themselves in the spaces he used to fill, the empty chair by the window, the way the barn door leaned now without his fixing hand. She read his books in the evenings, fingers brushing his penciled notes in the margins. He had written about silence and forgiveness, about how absence, too, could be a kind of presence. Then one dusk in late April, a rider came into town. May was on the porch, mending a seam. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats and saw the shape of him, broad-shouldered and dust-streaked, leading the black gelding that limped slightly on its left foreleg.
Ash.
Her needle stilled in the fabric. He dismounted slow. He looked older, somehow tired, sunburned, leaner. But his eyes found hers with the same steady weight, the same quiet heat. Neither of them moved. Then Lottie came out the door behind her and let out a sharp laugh of surprise. "Well, I'll be." But May didn't hear the rest. She rose, her heart beating like something wild, walked to the edge of the porch, met him there. Ash took off his hat, held it in his hands. "I found him," he said. "My brother wasn't where I thought he'd be, but I found him." May searched his face. There was pain there, but not regret. Something had settled in him, like dust after a long storm. "I'm glad," she said. Ash nodded, swallowed. "I thought about you every day," he said. "Didn't know if I had the right to come back, but I wanted to." She didn't speak. "I left because I had to," he went on, "but I came back because I want to stay." Her breath hitched. The sun was going down behind him, casting long shadows across the dirt road, gilding the porch steps in amber. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I know," he said, "but I brought you something." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch, handed it to her. She opened it slowly. Inside was a smooth river stone, polished by time. On its surface, carved into the gray, was a single word, home. May felt the air leave her lungs, not because of what it meant, but because of how long she'd gone without anyone offering her a place to belong. She closed her fingers around the stone. "Come inside," she said. "You look cold." Ash didn't smile, but his eyes shone with something bright. He followed her in. That night the boarding house felt like something new, not just shelter but sanctuary. Lottie made stew. Mrs. Templeton poured a measure of whiskey and called it celebration. The fire crackled, and May sat beside Ash, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. Later, when the others had gone to bed, he stayed behind to help her wash the dishes. They moved in quiet rhythm, hands grazing now and then, the warmth between them like the slow-building heat of coals. "You're different," he said. "I'm not hiding," she answered. He turned to face her fully, reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I see that," he said. And this time, when his hand lingered, she didn't pull away. She leaned into it. Not for rescue, not for forgetting, but for recognition. The days grew longer. The light lingered in golden streaks along the floorboards, and the prairie bloomed in slow, deliberate bursts. Life in Avonridge didn't change much by outward measure, but for those within the weathered walls of the boarding house, the shift was quiet and deep. May rose early most mornings, not out of habit, but because she wanted to. The stillness before dawn held a promise now. Ash often joined her, and they would walk out past the edge of town, where the grass swayed like waves under the breeze, their footsteps tracing the same path without need for words. He had begun carving again, small things, thoughtful things, a comb for Lottie's hair, a wooden spoon for Mrs. Templeton, a sparrow that sat on the kitchen windowsill. For May, he made a box no larger than her palm, its lid carved with wildflowers. Inside, a folded scrap of linen, wrapped around a piece of quartz he'd found along the river. He said it reminded him of the way her voice sounded the first time she said his name. She kept it on her bedside table. But nothing was certain, not even in spring. Word came down the trail that a man from May's past had been seen near Cheyenne, a man with a broken tooth and a scar like a lash across his temple, the kind of man who didn't forget a woman who got away. When Ash told her, his voice was low, his hands steady. He didn't ask what she wanted to do. He waited for her to speak. May stood very still. Then she walked to the hearth, where the fire crackled, and sat. The air felt sharp with memory. "I used to dream of killing him," she said. "I'd see his face and wake up gasping, my fists clenched." Ash waited. "But I don't want him to have that power, not anymore." He nodded, understanding not just the words, but the weight behind them. "We'll be ready," he said. "Not I'll protect you, but we, not possession, but partnership." When the man came, 3 weeks later, riding in with a cruel grin and whiskey in his breath, he found not the girl he'd broken, but a woman standing beside a man who didn't flinch. A woman whose silence wasn't fear, but choice. May didn't hide. She faced him in the middle of the street, in full daylight, her hair braided back, her jaw set. Ash stood nearby but didn't intervene. She didn't need him to. The man said her name, her old name, said it like a weapon. She looked him in the eye and said, "That woman died, I buried her." And the people of Avonridge, who had once overlooked her, stood behind her then, not out of spectacle but quiet solidarity. A town that had come to know her not by the stories of her past, but the life she had built from its ashes. The man left with nothing but dust on his boots. That night May sat with Ash beneath the stars, their shoulders touching. "I was so afraid I'd never be more than what happened to me," she said. "You're more than I ever hoped to find," he replied. There were no declarations, no grand promises, just hands twined together, the warmth of a shared blanket, the pulse of something true. In time, Lottie left to start her own dress shop in a town further north, but she wrote often. Mrs. Templeton took to calling Ash her odd but useful son-in-law, though no vows had yet been spoken. The boarding house stayed busy, but the rhythm remained gentle. And May, once invisible, now stood at the heart of it all, not hidden, not forgot. Every morning, Ash would watch her move through the parlor, the way her hair caught the morning light, and she would feel his eyes and smile without turning. She was seen. She was home. And that, at last, was enough.